Welcome back. I'm John Cale, and this is Level Up, a podcast where we talk about the things that you don't know that you don't know. And I hope since our last episode that you've been able to take some of the information from that episode and share it with some of your friends. And I hope that you've been able to do something different to make a difference in your life. I want to remind you that you can send comments on the episodes to me. I'll be happy to respond to those. I also have an email that you can send to called levelupwithjohn@gmail.com. So it's LVLupwithjohn@gmail.com. And I want to remind you that, this podcast, from my point of view, with 68 million of you out there in this generation, is something that could be changing many, many lives if you find value in it and you just take a moment to share this with someone else in your life that might matter. Today, we've got a very interesting subject that I think many of you are going to find very real in your life. This subject today, we mentioned last episode, is broken homes, broken life, and I have all the pieces. So broken home, broken life, and I have all the pieces. So this is about divorce. And, one of these things that happens in all of our lives, and honestly, this is something that affects probably about 1 out of every 2 of you that are listening to this podcast today. Right now, I think the official number is 43%. 43% of people in your generation are in a broken or divorced home. And, the sad thing is that this is not something that when you're a child and you start your life, you're thinking about the fact that the thing that is where you feel secure, right? You love your parents and you have that close relationship with them when you're a child, at least till you become a teenager. And then, they don't know anything, right? But when you're with your family, the last thing you think about is the fact that this could blow up. And you're not prepared for that, no matter what age or what circumstances are happening. So about 43% of you that are listening to the podcast today are experiencing currently divorce, have been through it as a child, and had it happen in your family with your parents, or there may be even some of you right now as adults that are married and you may be considering it. So we're gonna address this, and we're gonna come from a lot of angles. One of the things I'd mentioned to you are a couple statistics that you might find interesting. 43% of first marriages are ending in divorce. When you go to a second marriage, 60% of those marriages end in divorce. And when you move to a third marriage, 73% end in divorce. So that's the statistics don't get very good the more that you get married in life, right? You're becoming a professional person at marriage, but keeping married gets much harder as you move forward. And marriage is a very, very challenging thing, and it's an art that you learn because it takes 2 people that are completely separate individuals with personalities and skill sets on both sides that bring both of those things together to create a union and yet become one, but still have a separate identity and respect, right? That doesn't just happen. That takes work. So, no one thinks their family is going to blow up. And when that happens, there is a tremendous amount of loss and sadness and self-blame and anger and anxiety, and that can carry into your life through childhood, through schooling, through your finding out and figuring out who you are in your 20s, etc. So, one thing I always say is that unless you have experienced a situation that someone else is walking through, don't ever say, I understand how you feel. I learned that several years ago, because unless I've walked right where somebody else has walked, I cannot understand their feelings. I cannot understand the way they're thinking and what's going on in their life, right? And that's why if you've been there, you can help support other people through those types of things. So, hey, listen, we have a very special host this week that is going to be here. This is the first part of the podcast where we're dealing with, the broken home and the pain around it and all of the pieces that get blown out of the puzzle and the picture of life. And so today I have my beautiful daughter, Whitney, with us today. Hello, Whitney.
Hello.
This is my firstborn child, okay? I know she looks 25, maybe 27, right. but she's actually 37. Sorry, I had to tell him. Doesn't she look great for 37? I think so. I'm a little biased, obviously. But this is Whitney Nicole, Nikole. We did that especially when we named her, so it would be different. And what's really weird is seeing her as an adult woman sit here in front of me, see her with a child in front of me when she has her 6-year-old, almost 7-year-old daughter, my granddaughter. And but yet, no matter what, those of you who are parents out there realize that they're always like your kid, your little kid. Like I always see her as 16, right? But she's not anymore. Obviously, she's not 16. So Whitney has a very deep experience around divorce because her mother and I divorced over 30 years ago. So it's been quite a while. I think Whitney was 6 years old, right, when your mom and I divorced. And her mom and I were married when we were early. We were, I guess what I would say to you is previous episode, we talked about expectations. And I think we both had movies in our head of marriage and happiness and love and everything being wonderful. And we were married for about 10 years, if I'm not mistaken. And, we're really good friends now. We come to things together, and Whitney will talk about some of that. But the point is, Whitney has a very unique perspective because she actually grew up from being 6 years old in a broken home. In addition to that, she went through school, high school, college, got her degree, and then has now grown up, gotten married, has her own children now, right? So she's got angles of this from all over, which, excuse me, I think for many of you, this will be helpful because she's going to address the beginning, the situation when it happened, what it was like, and then walking through it. And in addition to that, what it's been like after it and rebuilding her life and becoming the woman that she is with her own family. So many of you out there, as I mentioned earlier, may be right now in the throes of a situation where your parents, out of nowhere, are letting you know that their marriage is going to dissolve and going to blow up. Or maybe you have a child and your marriage is going to blow up. So this could be very helpful in a variety of different ways. So I'm going to let Whitney share a little bit about herself. We're going to, just give you a little background on her. She is here in Northern Ohio, very close to me, about 5 minutes away. We get to see her and Jeff, her husband, and I'm going to let her just share a little bit about where she's at, and then we'll pick up and we'll move forward. Whitney?
Yeah. So this is exciting and also a little surreal to be able to share. Grateful to be here and talk about this topic. I think that, so my location you mentioned, we're here in Northeast Ohio, and my family unit is lots of family close by, but my husband, Jeff, and I, we've been together for over 20 years and married for going on 13 years. So that means a lot to me. And my daughter, Stella, is 6.5. Not 6,
yeah, right.
6.5.
Yes, she'll tell you that.
Yeah, when people ask her how old she is, her response is yes. But she's 6.5, and I have a wide array of background. I guess everybody talks about school and their jobs, so I guess that's what I should talk about.
Yeah, share your background.
Went to school in the area. Got to go to a private school locally, dabbled in a public school briefly, had the opportunity to experience both, but got to go through that, and then went to college and also found my way through that journey, which was a journey because I did it, then didn't, then ended up finishing it, and realized that throughout that journey, I wanted the degree, but wanted to utilize it in a different way. And had the opportunity to do some different jobs, but my degree is in psychology. And my interest was always the neuroscience and cognitive psychology piece, which is super helpful in what I do for work now. I'm a realtor, and I also help run our family business, which we will soon have the opportunity to purchase. So we're going to be able to have the opportunity to become business owners. So that that degree, although what I thought I was going to do with it is different, it's been hugely used in what I'm doing now.
You've used your psychology in that business, working with tons of, in many, in most cases, young people, right?
Yes.
Young adults.
Yep.
She's probably used this degree on her father as well at points, I'm sure, to help as well. But yeah, I mean, you've lived out the use of that degree in everyday common life, working with people, not just sitting, and counseling. That's another role that's crucial, right? Being a counselor in a room with people and dealing with their problems and struggles. But you've been living that out for years, right, with people out in the real workplace. So yeah, that's been great.
Yep. And parenting. That degree should not be underestimated in parenting.
No. No, I would agree.
Yeah.
I would agree. And then what about school? You went to University of Akron, right?
I went to University of Akron. Yep. Graduated there in 2012.
Mm-hmm.
And it went, I loved Akron. Fun fact about Akron, you can park wherever you want. They have commuter parking and then resident parking. But at Kent, it's based on your grade level. So that sealed the deal for me with Akron U.
Well, there you go. Those of you who are looking for parking. A school, these are big deals that you're working with right now, that you're handling. And you shared a little bit. So I know Whitney is currently involved in the real estate. She got her license and all of her credentials for that in about half the time that it takes people to get them. She focused on it and got it done in about half the time. Jeff, I can tell you a funny story about Jeff. Whitney had lots of friends when she came through high school. Lots of friends. I remember going, hanging out with her and her friends. I remember going to haunted houses with her friends, and some of her friends who are 6'3" in front of me going into a haunted house, and we got in about 10 feet and something jumped out. And these 6'3", 6 foot tall guys were falling down on the ground, grabbing me and asking me, "Mr. Cale, I'm so afraid, please help me." Right. I mean, I remember these fun things, right, that we did together. But, her current husband, Jeff, one of the things that's really interesting to me is that Whitney and I had this situation that we faced, where Whitney never really had a really heavy duty boyfriend, right, in high school. She had a lot of good friends, and some were closer than others, but she really never was like, this is the dude, right? And Whitney was senior year, 18 years old, graduating from high school. I think it was in April, literally like a month before she graduated from CVCA. And she was telling me, "Hey, Dad, there's this guy, Jeff, I really like, and, we're hanging out." And I'm like, "Oh, yeah, tell me about Jeff," right? So she's like, "Yeah, so Jeff, this is what he does." And I'm like, "Well, how old is Jeff?" And she's like, "He's 24. And I'm like, "No. You are not going to spend time with this guy. You're 18 I'm a guy." So I'm thinking a 24-year-old, 18-year-old just graduating. This is not happening. It is not going to take place. And, I told her, "No, Whitney, you can't, and I'll never forget. Whitney said to me, she looked me in the eye and she said to me, "Dad," she said, "I remember we were standing in the living room and you were behind the couch and I was looking at you talking to you, and I was kind of wound up, man." And I'm like, this ain't happening. And I remember she said to me, "You've invested your whole life into me, trying to teach me how to do right things, make good decisions. And now you're going to have to trust me. And, very infrequently do I not have words to spit out. And that was a point in time when I didn't. And I literally heard in my mind, leave her alone. And it was like, okay. And so I did. And, long and behold, long story short, I found that Jeff, truly is one in, I don't know how many, but there's a lot of people you'd go through to find someone like him with skills that he has and the person that he is. And when they got married, I stood up on their wedding day, and I remember saying on their wedding day, when I gave my little speech, that as a dad, the way that you know that the person marrying your daughter is the right person is that they leave with them and you don't have to worry about her anymore, because you know that her care is at the level that I would have cared for her with this person. And that's how I feel with Jeff. He's been a wonderful son-in-law, husband, dad, and we really do have a good relationship. And so I remember those things, right? Those are a lot of fun things. There are a lot of things that Whitney and I won't spend a lot of time on this, but we're very similar. We're both very structured and organized. We don't like things out of order. We don't like things to get popped on us out of nowhere. One of the things that we both have, we do not like to sweat when we're getting ready, right?
Right.
When we're getting ready, the worst possible thing is you're getting ready to go somewhere and put on clothes and you're sweating, right? That is a bad situation. And then once you're dressed and you're trying to go somewhere and you're sweating, it's like we both get extremely irritated when that happens. So that's something that we have together. Whitney really loves chicken, by the way. That's something that we talk about a lot, because when I go to her house, a lot of times she's making chicken. And I'm like, what, can you make you make beef ever? Can you make something else other than chicken? And so it's kind of an inside joke that we have, but she eats really healthy. And she's doing a great job as a mom. So let's talk about, I want to just give you some reasons why divorces happen. So I went and looked at some of the current, most relevant reasons right now that divorces are happening in this year. Number one is a lack of commitment, right? People get married and it's wonderful. The wedding day, the dress, the beauty, the hoopla, the party, the honeymoon, everything's wonderful. And then, reality sets in, and a marriage is not just about that day, right? That marriage is about lifelong, and it takes a lot of commitment from both people to be able to maintain that and to be committed to do the things to make it work. Also, cheating is another issue. People are not faithful. They don't take it serious in the day and age we live in right now. And so that can become another issue that is the reason why things are blowing up. Conflicts and arguing and things never being resolved, right? So many of you may realize, even in your relationships, even if you're not married yet, that you can have arguments with people. You may be someone you love romantically, you're involved with, you're engaged with, right? You have an argument and you have it and it's over. You both go away. And then all of a sudden some time passes and now you guys are having dinner, or you watch a show, or you listen to something, and all of a sudden you're okay with each other and you move on. The problem is it's unresolved. You might have said something that somebody is not going to forget. And one of the biggest problems we all have, right, that can happen to myself and anybody else, is that once we speak words, we can't go, whoops, I'm going to take that back. It's not like retracting an email and going, well, I'm glad I got a hold of that before somebody saw it. Once it comes out, somebody hears it, and it could cause hurt and get stuck for a long time in someone's life. So the other thing that can help cause big problems is money, because one person thinks about it this way, the other person thinks about it a different way, and there's not a coming together to understand how we're going to function and do this in marriage appropriately. Sometimes you're just too young to get married, right? Just because you love somebody and you're into it right now doesn't mean that you really are at a point where you're really to make, like we talked about, the commitment about marriage. Now, I can tell you that when I got married to Whitney's mom, we were young. I mean, 30 years ago, we divorced. So we were young. And we did care and love each other, and we're excited about our future and all the dreams that we would have together. And many of those things happened. And then there were some things that came into our relationship that we never thought would happen. Some physical things that happened with Whit's mom that were really, really detrimental and really life-threatening that we had to deal with. And we walked through those together. But things happen and they come right when you're young. And unrealistic expectations. We talked about expectations last session. Going in with the movie playing in your head of stars going off and lights and everything's happy and gay and wonderful. And, when reality comes, there are those times when all that takes place. But when reality comes, sometimes there's some tough places you have to walk through. Addictions, right? You get into a marriage and there's no issues. And then all of a sudden somebody decides I'm going to start getting stoned all the time, or I'm going to start drinking more, or I'm going to, and all of a sudden you've got a spouse that's got an addiction issue. And unfortunately, the reality is that these substances, I think as many of I know as well, can alter who we are as people. And so we have a clash. And especially if we have kids then come into that picture. And then one of the last things I'll mention that can cause a problem, and as I'm talking about this, there may be many of you that associate right now as I'm going through these things, right, that you're facing maybe some of this or you came through it. Domestic violence, right? Unfortunately, in the world that we live in, there are people who think it's okay to be violent with their marriage partner and with their spouse, right? And, I was raised, man, it is never, ever okay for a guy to put his hands on a woman, to smack a woman, but there are people who believe that's okay. And, I will tell you that can just totally destroy a marriage and cause divorce, right? Because it can literally cause trauma, like post-traumatic type syndrome when somebody gets abused. And I believe it's illegal as well. So I thought to myself, what is a word today? Every once in a while, I have a word that I want to pop out here that gets us thinking toward the subject matter. And here's the word that I thought of today. And you're going to be like, what? So the word today is hamster. And you're probably like, what the heck does a hamster have to do with this? Well, here's why, right? If you've ever watched a hamster, whether you had one in your house or you went to the pet store and you saw one of the cool things is to watch those guys go through their little tunnels and pop out and, sit and chop on stuff and be looking at you. And it's all nice and cute. And they jump on the wheel, right? They jump on the hamster wheel and they are running and running and running and running and running and running. And I don't really understand if they get that they're not going anywhere. But as the people looking from the outside in, they're on the hamster wheel and they're just going and going and going and probably busting up a sweat and, but nothing changes. They're in the same place. And so the reason I thought about that today was because in our situations with divorce, right, it's very easy to get on a hamster wheel and be trying to do something to deal with this, but you're not really making any traction. You're just kind of going around and around and around and around like the hamster on the wheel. You have to be able to identify and move through it. So that's what we want to talk about today. Those are the kind of things that we actually want to talk about. So, like I said, you may be going through some of this, and what we're going to do is go through 3 different question pieces or 3 different sections here over the next few minutes with Whitney. And then, I'm going to urge you to come back for the next episode, because the next episode will be Broken Home, Broken Family, and I'm putting the pieces back together. So we're going to talk about how you move past it and what you can do and expect as you move through it and you move forward. So first question that I've got, Whitney, for you is, can you talk a little bit about, and what we want to talk about is what happened, right, that caused this. So the first question I've got is, can you kind of paint a picture of what family looked like for you growing up before the divorce? Like what did things look like before the divorce happened?
Sure. So it's a bit difficult to recall because obviously, so I was 6.
You're old now.
When, I'm getting old, right? Long-term memory. Yeah. Because I was 6. So, my earliest memories are generally around 3, 4. So, there was a little bit, but, I remember doing things with you and Mom, and it is hard to recall though. I do remember particular times of, being together, and specifically one time that you took me to SeaWorld. I remember doing that with you, and I remember doing a like an art project in my room there where we lived in that house together with like paints and this t-shirt, and we made these t-shirts, and I had just gotten like Lion King was super big back then, which I was into. I don't know that anyone else is, but I remember having gotten all this new stuff for my room with you guys, and I do recall those things, but honestly, there's a lot of like, I feel that I felt the unsettledness at a young age.
You knew something was not clicking.
Yes, because I was young. So, I mean, prior to age 3 or 4, there isn't a lot of recollection. And then starting at that age, 4 or 5, the unsettledness and the different things that were at play, were already kind of in the works, I would say.
Can you remember how you found out that this was going to go south? And I'm sure it's kind of like when major things in all of our lives happen. Like anybody that's watching that was alive on 9/11, right? When it happened, you were encapsulated in that time, right? Like you can see yourself, where you were when that happened, when a traumatic event. And can you remember that? How you found out?
Oh yeah, I remember. So I was at my grandma Nancy's house. I actually spent a decent amount of time there during that period of time, just because of, what was going on with my mom's health and logistics. I don't even know all of it, but I remember that. And I remember being there and her getting this call. And I was sitting there actually doing reading with her, because I must have supposed to have been at school. I don't know. I had my reading book there at her table, and her saying, well, Mom and Dad are, like gonna not like be together and live in the same house. And I don't really think I knew what that meant. I know that I didn't know what that meant.
Yeah.
But I remember that moment. I can see it. I can feel it. That was the time.
Do you remember what was the hardest thing for you in that situation when that happened? Do you remember like what was one of the hardest parts of that situation? Do you have a thought process at all around that?
I think that as kids, kids don't really understand context. So for us, it's like, oh, well, something's wrong. It's going to get fixed. It'll go back to normal. We don't have the ability to process all of the complexities that have occurred over, 10 years of marriage that have led to this event that is now happening, and realizing this is probably not going to change. There's nothing I can do to change this. But we as children, and if you've been a child through this, or you know psychology, or you're a health professional, you know that kids just want to fix everything. And no matter what, kids think it's their fault. And so a huge challenge for me was just realizing, I think that, when I would go to school, that, it was Christmas and my friends were all going with their family and I was going 2 places. I had to pick. Well, you guys actually made the schedule, so I didn't really pick, but, I didn't get to be with Mom and Dad on Christmas. It was one or the other. And so there's this constant tugging, this way, that way, this way, that way, that no matter what, you feel like you're letting somebody down. Like there is no win, because if it's a win for being with Dad, then then I don't get to be with Mom. Yeah. You feel like you can't win.
Yeah. And listen, one of the things that I'll tell you is that I told Whitney when we decided to do this that I wanted to be very real, wanted her to be very real about everything that happened. obviously it takes two people to have a marriage that's successful. So I'm not sitting here today doing this podcast with Whitney like, hey, I'm the guy who was the right guy and I did everything perfect. And, so let's talk about that, right? That it takes two people to have a successful marriage. So I had the things in my life that were wrong and that were jacked up. And I have my part in that, right? And totally own that and admit that. And so I've asked her to, be very real, because in some cases, I could have done some things differently or maybe been a better dad to her. I'm just thankful that she's turned out to be the woman she is with all the stuff that got thrown at her, because when you have lots of pressure and lots of things that come into your life that are uncomfortable, the world offers us a lot of ways to deal with that, whether you want to take a pill or smoke something or drink something or some other type of something, right, to fill a hole. And I'm just thankful that she has, become who she is through that. So I just want you to understand that's kind of the backdrop through both of these sections. If you had to describe your childhood as this happened, could you, like, 3 words, in 3 words, right? Your childhood during this period as you went through it, what would you say those words would be that would be identifiers?
This was an interesting one. During this process, after I knew the divorce was happening, the 3 words would be overwhelming, unknown, and fun. But I did have fun as a child. So okay. Overwhelming, unknown, and fun. So I want to just clarify. So are you saying that even through all of the struggle, there was still fun? You were able to have some fun and still enjoy being a child, right? Even though despite the situation, right? Yes, I was. And let me say, this is my perspective, right? I'm a female, I'm 37, that's my take. And I also was super fortunate to have a mom and a dad that stayed around, that's not always the way it goes. So yes, I think it was still fun. And I definitely still had a lot of joy in my life, but overwhelming and unknown were 2 large, just popped in my brain for sure. Significant. Yeah. And I would think that many of you who are listening to the podcast probably can understand and associate with those words. It's kind of upset the fruit basket, man. And like, what is what and what's going to fall where? The other thing I would mention base wise here is that, one of the things her and mom and I committed to was not putting her in the middle of it as much as we could, because this, and many of you can probably understand this, is when the kids get in the middle of a divorce, it's ugly, right? If one parent wants to use a kid and say things through a kid to get to the other parent, or, it can become a very, very ugly situation, right? And so the one thing I think that's really important, if this has happened or you're going through it or whatever, is do not put your kids in the middle of a divorce where they are giving messages back and forth, or you're making them feel more torn, right? Or you're talking negative about your former spouse, right? And I know that sounds like, many of you might go, dude, have you lost your mind? Like, this person hurt me. They devastated my life. I do understand, but for the sake of your children, it's still their mom or their dad, right? And they're still trying to figure out what's going on because they're overwhelmed and there's no direction. So we purpose to not bash each other, and we purpose not to put her in the middle of arguments and say bad things about her mom and, all of those things. So we really tried our best to, and she mentioned seeing each of us, right? So there were times where these are things you don't think about, right? When you're thinking about a divorce, there isn't a book that tells you, here's the 100 things that change when you do this. And so one of those things is holidays, Christmas, right? So now she's in the middle of, well, I got to spend time with dad because I love him, and I got to spend time with mom because I love her. And it's like, well, now she's got double duty on a holiday
to see both of them, because if she chose to see her mom one time, then maybe I could feel like, well, I got robbed, right? So I think many of you may be understanding some of these feelings, and I think it's good for us to reflect on that. Let me ask you this. Let's move to the second point that I want to talk about. I want to talk about the impact and how that shaped you. Okay. So some questions around that. How did you think growing up in a broken home shaped the way you are and see yourself today? Like, here we are today. How did this situation that you had to go through, right, that came out of nowhere, and oh, by the way, wasn't something that you caused to happen, and it was immediate change, and it wasn't your choice to change, right? If change happens and it's someone else forcing it on you, none of us like that. So how would you answer that question?
So I think that this is a complex one, but just to touch on some of the bigger things, I think that when you come from a situation like this, let's say you only have one parent that stays around locally, maybe that you're seeing, you may not have as much of this happening for you internally. But for me, like I said, I was fortunate to have both parents to want to stay involved in my life and close by. So there was this, no matter what, I'm letting someone down. That's significant for me. I think that created a lot of stress internally for me. I was never stressed externally as a child. I don't feel like I was never amped up. I was always had fun and seemed pretty relaxed, but internally there was always that
relaxed.
Yeah, I'm relaxed. I'm relaxed.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
All right. Maybe there's differing opinions on that.
Lots of energy. That's what we're talking about here.
Yeah.
Lots of energy.
Well, I do have a lot of energy, but I was never like uptight.
Yeah.
I always enjoyed myself, but there was this inner, tugging of like, I'm always letting somebody down. And I think too, it kind of goes into like this cycle, right? So, observing a parent unit and your first modeled parent unit behavior being one that is broken. And for me, unfortunately, that was at a younger age, so I did see it a little bit. It's not like kids whose parents split up when they're 2, they don't hardly remember, but I did see that a little bit. So that bred kind of the sense of, okay, so I don't want to disappoint you. If I disagree with you and I disappoint you, then maybe you won't love me as much. Mm. And if you don't love me as much, then you might leave. Mm. And so needing that like approval and validations, because if I don't meet your expectations, then you might leave or you might treat me different.
So if I hear what you're saying is that if your mom and I divorced and maybe you tied that to an expectation that's why maybe it happened, there were things that weren't met, right? Mm-hmm. So now it's like, well, what happens if I don't meet those expectations? Then you might leave me. Right? Sure.
And that translates to but that translates just to all relationships, not even romantic, So in my interactions with friends, it's like, oh, well, what if they didn't like that I said that? Or how did that hit them? Or why didn't they respond? Or, earlier in my childhood, teenage years, and adulthood, that was a lot of, prayerfully maturing and understanding, like, it's okay. It's not always that way. But when something like that, what is more significant when you're a child than your parents?
Yep.
So in that first relationship that's modeled, you see, oh, it didn't work out. So it broke. They left. It settles in your brain quite a bit to think, well, what if I don't do this for somebody or do this the way someone wants or perform the way someone wants? Am I always going to get, left?
Yep. Well, I want to mention this. I want to make sure we're doing okay on time from the standpoint here as well. We have a lot to get through, and I want to make sure we get through with that. But one of the things I want to say specifically about what you just said was about people leaving, right? The pattern of marriage, and this is a big deal because there are so many ladies and out there that could be watching even today that are single moms in this generation, and there's no dad. Now, obviously, there isn't a mom who has a child at this point that will. What is the word I'm looking for? There isn't a mom at this point that has a child where there wasn't a dad involved. It wasn't a miraculous birth, right? So there's a dad somewhere. He may be incarcerated, he may have passed away, or he may not be involved, right? But here's the point. The way that we were designed was in the fact that as people, that when there's no male involved in a home, that becomes a big problem, because as a dad, like when my dad died, right? We look to our Heavenly Father as people. God as our Heavenly Father is there, and we build relationship with him. But if our earthly dad blows up our relationship, right, and he's gone and he leaves us or abandons us, then we have a distorted fact of what it's like to have a father, right? Which then begins to impact the spiritual side of our life, which I always talk about, where we have a hard time believing in God. And so when you don't have a dad in your life and someone tells you that there's a God, a Heavenly Father who loves you, and you're like, well, my father was out, you don't have any trust in that, right? So it becomes so important intrinsically in who we are as people. So, I think you mentioned briefly on this, how this showed up in your relationships, maybe not as much, but do you see how it shows up in your relationship, like with Jeff and those kind of things? Anything else you would add there right now on that?
I think in different seasons, you see it differently. It looks different when you're in college than it does when you're engaged and then when you're a parent. But I think from a romantic perspective, so in my relationship with Jeff, I think something I've noticed generally is I have trouble being present because of that need to always anticipate what's coming next. Where am I going? What clothes do I need? Which house am I at this week? What do I need for school? Which house am I going to be at tonight? All these forethought processes. Yes, that makes me a good planner. I do enjoy planning, but it was something I had to be intentional about as an adult, and being present and not always anticipating and not always forecasting, So that is something overarching, I would say. And then in my marriage, I would say growing up, even though I still saw both parents, what I saw was both parents, for me, functioning independently. So yes, both of my parents remarried after your divorce, but I saw my mom function independently for quite a while, and you briefly, but I think because I am a female and because my mom is the same gender as me, I took on a little bit of seeing her as a woman functioning independently, and I carried that modeling into my own relationship. My husband is such a servant's heart. He is so kind and so helpful, but he is also very intelligent, and he is a fantastic leader. And it took a lot of intentionality for me to be able to understand that needing help and letting him do things, or even asking for help, is okay. I don't need to be independent to be okay. I don't need to be like, I'm not weak or showing any sort of weakness to ask for help. I don't innately like to ask for help, because I think watching a mom do a lot on her own for many years in different seasons of my life, I just kind of took in that behavior of like, I can do it myself. I don't need help, So let me ask you this, Whitney. On the third piece, what are some of the things that, around healing or holding on to and rebuilding? So a question around that would be, if you had to give yourself your younger self some advice
to yourself or someone listening who's growing up or has gone through or is going through something like this? What piece of advice would you give them?
I would say to realize that what happened to you doesn't have to define who you are, and you can break the cycle, you know? So just because something happened to you, you can either live in what you saw lived out in front of you and repeat that, or you can learn from what you saw lived out in front of you and decide, yeah, that ran in my family till it meant me, because I'm not going to repeat that cycle. And I would say, like, I just think that many people, you know, it's that whole posture of like, it's easier to repeat what you saw than to change it. But, you know, adversity is something that can be used for good, you know? And so for me, you touched on like, oh, you didn't have many boyfriends and you didn't bring guys around too much. And that's very true, because I decided very early on, there were many things I didn't know, like, where do I want to live? And what's my career going to be? And do I want to have kids? But very early on, I was bound and determined that I would not repeat that cycle of a broken home and divorce, because I just think it's sad, you know, for everybody.
Yep.
So,
yep. Yeah, I agree. So we've talked a little bit today. Time has just moved away. We've had some serious conversations, and all of a sudden, boom, our time is slipping. But we've talked about what happened. We've talked about going through it. We've talked about the pieces, right? And one of the things that I'd like to say today is, you know, all of the stuff that you've gone through and you faced to this point, you know, worrying about it isn't changing anything, right? It's an early lesson that we need to learn in life, and sometimes it takes a long time, and I'm still dealing with this myself. And that is that, you know, we can spend a lot of time worrying about circumstances in our life, but I think there's stats that say that, you know, out of all the stuff you worry about, only like 90% of it, or some, you know, like 10% of it comes true out of what you worry about. And out of the stuff that does happen, it's just infinitesimal, even in the impact that you thought it was going to have. So you have to do something. Worrying does nothing about it. So I want to just tell you that, you know, what we're going to do is, in our next episode, we're going to dig in deeper with this. Whitney's going to be back with us again, and we're going to talk about what looking like moving on and putting the pieces back together looks like. So I want to remind you, if you would, I would really appreciate if you could think about people in your life that you feel this podcast that we're putting together on life subject matters for you could be influential on them. And I would ask you to see that as a way to make a movement, to do something, to invite somebody to come back to the podcast and see all the other ones. They're all listed up on Apple. They're on Spotify. The video clips are out across all of their social media. And I would also like to remind you about my book that's called Finding the Answer by John Cale. And that is up on Amazon. So if you'll type that in, again, that's a 30-minute read. And it's written specifically for this time, because nobody wants to sit down with the book that's this thick, and we don't read them, right? Most people who start books start and read a portion of them, and they never finish the books. The percentage is super high. So this is a 30-minute book for you to read that will help you reflect on who you are, where you are, and bring you to a point where you can really look at how I can find an answer in life that will really change my life for the rest of my life. And so I'm going to tell you, until next time, do something, please. Do something, and we'll see you soon. And remember, you're unique, and there's only one you. And I'm John, and I'm out.